The United States and Japan have signalled a tougher stand on China. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Tokyo with Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin for talks. Beijing has been warned not to indulge in coercion and destabilising behaviour in the region. Tokyo and Washington say that China's actions, which they deem as inconsistent with the existing international order, present political, economic, military and technological challenges. Grace Lee with this report.
Well, the meeting served as a major reaffirmation of just how close ties are between Tokyo and Washington. Of course, with this being the first overseas trip by top U.S. officials under President Biden, they did emphasize that quite a bit. And going forward, they say that they will be focusing on Asia as a top priority. Now, they did address China as being a threat to the region as well. In a joint document after the meeting, the officials said that China's actions that don't meet existing international order pose challenges to the U.S. and its allies. Now, Secretary Austin was asked some more questions about the U.S.'s stance on China after the meeting. He addressed it a little bit more directly, saying that in the past few years, the U.S. has been addressing threats in the Middle East, and during that time, China has built up and modernized its military, and that it now poses a threat to some of the U.S.'s top allies here. He says there will be kind of a push to maintain a competitive edge against China in Washington.
We believe in democracy and human rights, the rule of law, because we've seen how our own countries are stronger because we adhere to those values, and because they are under threat in many places, including in this region. And China uses coercion and aggression to systematically erode autonomy in Hong Kong, undercut democracy in Taiwan, abuse human rights in Xinjiang and Tibet, and assert maritime claims in the South China Sea that violate international law. We're united in the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region, where countries follow the rules, cooperate whenever they can, and resolve their differences peacefully. And in particular, we will push back if necessary when China uses coercion or aggression to get its way.
I know Japan shares our concerns with China's destabilizing actions. And as I have said before, China is a pacing challenge for the Department of Defense. And we know that competing in today's shifting global dynamics can only be done through the spirit of teamwork and cooperation, which are the hallmarks of our alliance with Japan.
Another major issue that was addressed is, of course, North Korea. Just yesterday, Washington confirmed that it had reached out to the country, and we heard a pretty negative response from top North Korean officials asking Washington to not cause a stink with the new Biden administration. Now, Secretary Blinken later addressed those threats, and he rather put a major emphasis on his ties with Japan and South Korea, saying that a trilateral approach would be best.
Japan and the United States, together with our allies and partners, will be strong advocates for our shared approach, grounded in our values and our joint commitment to the security and well-being of all our people. This will be the message we reiterate later this week in Seoul, when Secretary Austin and I will meet our counterparts in the Republic of Korea. As we discussed today, greater trilateral cooperation among all three of our countries will make us stronger.
So U.S. officials here really trying to play up that trilateral engagement and united front against North Korea. The next stop for the two U.S. officials will, of course, be Seoul, where they say they'll be discussing similar matters. And finally, they'll be meeting with top Chinese officials in Alaska.
Simon Marks joins us from Washington, D.C. now for more on this. Simon, strong words from Mr. Blinken on China, as well as from General Lloyd Austin as well. How far can these words go, though?
Well, I think this is the first empirical evidence that we've had, Dawn, of just how hard a line the Biden administration intends to take, at least in the early stages of the president's administration towards Beijing. And in a way, while there was a lot of talk about coercive behaviour on the part of the Chinese and their territorial aspirations in the South China Seas, in a way, the key phrase that was used there by the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was, "We're united in the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region," because everything else you could have put into the mouths of Trump administration officials. But what these Biden administration officials are doing is building essentially a coalition that will back the positions that President Biden takes towards China. That's one of the reasons these meetings are taking place in Japan and South Korea before the meeting later this week with top Chinese diplomats in Anchorage, Alaska. So it is evidence that the Biden administration is going to go to the mat on issues like human rights in Xinjiang and Tibet over China's territorial aspirations and the threats that the Biden administration says that China poses to its neighbours in the region, but doing so in a manner that allows American diplomats, they hope, to speak with the imprimatur of approval from some of China's neighbours in the region, including this week the imprimatur that they hope they will be gathering in both Tokyo and Seoul.
Simon, expectations haven't been high for outcomes for this Alaska summit on Thursday, but could this latest exchange have an impact, perhaps, on those upcoming talks with Beijing?
Yeah, I think there's no question that that's a possibility. I mean, the Chinese will obviously have to decide how they seek to respond to the language that the Secretary of State and the Defence Secretary have used. Remember, there's nothing inherently new about the language or the tonality that these two American cabinet secretaries are striking, as opposed to the kind of rhetoric that we used to hear, for example, from then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, or from President Trump, for that matter, when it comes to China. But the Chinese are facing now a slightly different opponent in these conversations, in the sense that the Biden administration is saying, look, we are going to be competitive where we should be, adversarial where we must be, and collaborative where we can be. So there's an opportunity within that conversation to focus on the collaborative piece of all of this. But there's also a danger inherent in that to the Chinese, because, for example, the Biden administration has indicated it would like to break the climate change discussion off from other elements of disagreement between Washington, D.C. and Beijing. Given that that's an ask that the Americans may be making, the Chinese will have to decide, do they go along with it, or do they say, no, we want this to be a one holistic conversation that deals with everything, warts and all. I think it's going to be an important meeting, that one, in a couple of days' time in Alaska.
Certainly will be. And meantime, Simon, we've also had some rather colourful language from North Korea vis-à-vis the United States. How do you expect the White House to respond to what are being seen as North Korea's latest threats?
Well, they indicated yesterday that they had made these overtures to the North Koreans, which now we know Kim Jong-un's sister, presumably speaking on behalf of the North Korean government, has absolutely rejected. It'll be interesting to see what the White House press secretary has to say later today, what we get from the State Department when that briefing occurs. There will, I think, be a desire to keep the focus firmly on the relationship with Beijing ahead of those talks in Anchorage. North Korea may clearly be an agenda item for those talks, but whether we are still in an era of sort of constantly accelerating tit for tat, as we were to some extent during the Trump presidency, with the very colourful language that then President Donald Trump would use about the North Koreans, I think that's unlikely. I think we may see a pause before the next American move on this issue.
Simon, thank you very much for that. Simon Marks there in Washington, D.C.